For years, Dr. Mireya Mayor has been one of the most respected primatologists on television, a woman who traded high heels for muddy boots and chased wildlife through some of the most unforgiving jungles on Earth. On Expedition Bigfoot, she was the scientific anchor, collecting DNA samples, analyzing hair fibers, and keeping the team grounded in real biology. But after 3 seasons of unexplained findings, she stepped away from the spotlight. Until now, out of nowhere, Mireya has returned, with new data, private recordings, and a warning that could redefine what we think lives in North America's forests. Subscribe for more cryptid investigations, because what she's about to reveal is no longer speculation, it's evidence. Long before television crews followed her into dense Appalachian hollows, Mireya Mayor's curiosity was forged in the heat, humidity, and wild overgrowth of southern Florida. Born to Cuban immigrant parents in Miami, she grew up at the edge of wetlands, where the neighborhood ended and the Everglades began. Her childhood wasn't filled with comic books or video games. It was frogs, wading boots, and field notebooks. She would kneel for hours along muddy canal banks, gently capturing anoles, dragonflies, even spiders most kids screamed at. Her mother used to joke that Mireya brought home more insects than groceries. Teachers noted she didn't just memorize answers, she demanded explanations. Why did certain birds change their songs at dusk? Why did water snakes surface after storms? Why did raccoons disappear from an area for days, then suddenly reappear in bulk? She didn't accept because nature is strange as an answer. At school, classmates saw a contradiction. She was athletic, graceful, even participated in dance. Yet she would sprint across a field to identify a distant bird call. She was the kind of child who noticed patterns others dismissed as coincidence. On her 12th birthday, her parents bought her a simple cassette recorder. That night, she crept outside and captured the sound of a mysterious low bellow echoing through mangroves. She played it constantly, analyzing tone and pitch shifts. Her science teacher chalked it up to alligators. Mireya disagreed silently and wrote, for the first time, the phrase she would revisit decades later. This voice has shape. When extended family gathered, her grandfather would whisper Cuban folk tales about hidden creatures in uncharted jungles. Most children would have had nightmares. Mireya had a notebook. As she entered high school, her focus shifted from general wildlife to primates. She saw behavior in monkeys, territorial pacing, vocal mimicry, branch anticipation, that mirrored some of the odd behaviors she'd seen from Florida's biggest animals. She wondered privately whether vocal complexity evolved around competition, not just communication. But what truly changed her trajectory happened at 15, during a volunteer trip to an isolated wildlife sanctuary deep in Panama. One night, while logging howler monkey activity, she heard something respond from far downriver, deeper, slower, with a layered resonance no one could identify. Her mentor dismissed it as echo distortion. Mireya believed otherwise. She marked the direction, time, and tonal structure in her journal meticulously. Years later, rereading her notes, she realized she had documented something most scientists ignored, an unanswered conversation. Even then, she sensed a truth she couldn't articulate. Sometimes nature keeps secrets not to deceive us, but because we haven't learned how to listen yet. In 2001, early in her academic career, Mireya joined a primatology survey deep within the Congo Basin. The assignment sounded simple: document troop behavior in western lowland gorillas. But the rainforest had a way of turning simple objectives into uncomfortable questions. Almost immediately, things felt off. Every few nights, entire gorilla groups vacated prime feeding grounds without clear cause. There were no leopard tracks, no food scarcity indicators, and no signs of illness. They moved quietly, almost urgently, as if avoiding something that traveled by sound rather than sight. Local Mboko trackers, men who spent their lives reading forest language, whispered the name Mokele, meaning the one that watches from the trees. They didn't describe it as a monster. They described it as a pressure, a presence that changed the forest's pulse. Mireya didn't laugh, but she kept her notes scientific. Troop displacement, silence zones, uneven canopy agitation. One night, while documenting nocturnal calls, she recorded a vocalization unlike anything in her coursework. It was long, low, and layered, reaching frequencies below human speech. The sound resonated through the waterlogged soil, making her equipment vibrate. Her mentor dismissed it as a distorted buffalo call. Yet when she compared frequency patterns later, it didn't match any known species. It was too controlled, too intentional. The following morning revealed more anomalies. Foliage 5 meters high had been stripped and twisted, not clawed. A muddy impression in the riverbank lacked the curved toe arc seen in gorillas and chimps. Nearby, the carcass of a forest buffalo lay collapsed with no bite marks, only blunt force trauma. Predators tear. Something territorial breaks. Mireya cataloged everything carefully. Plaster casts, audio recordings, and location coordinates. But when she attempted to export the data back at camp, specific files were corrupted. Not everything, only the anomalies. Backup cassettes flickered with static gaps, as if something had interrupted them precisely where evidence mattered most. When she asked a seasoned ranger about the vocalization, he avoided eye contact and replied quietly, "When that voice comes, even the insects stop." On the flight home, she wrote a single unsettling line in her journal. "We recorded the reactions, not the source." She wouldn't realize for years how important that observation would become. When producers from Expedition Bigfoot first approached Dr. Mireya Mayor, she hesitated. She'd spent decades building a reputation through National Geographic fieldwork, primate research in Madagascar, and academic lecturing. One poorly framed television edit could undo years of credibility. But their pitch was different. They didn't want jump scares or staged drama. They wanted environmental DNA samples, thermal imaging analysis, and primate-based movement interpretation. They offered access to wilderness zones normally restricted by bureaucratic red tape. That access alone was invaluable. Once filming began, Mireya quickly noticed subtle biological patterns the cameras didn't catch. Elk herds were migrating earlier than expected. Bears avoided certain valleys despite abundant forage. Tree breaks appeared consistently between 7 and 9 feet high. Not storm damage, but leverage. And eyewitness testimonies were remarkably consistent. Loggers, hunters, and wildlife techs described shoulder sway, midfoot pressure, lateral pacing, and avoidance behavior. These weren't campfire embellishments. They were behavioral hallmarks of an intelligent, cautious primate. Off-camera, she collected samples meticulously. Saliva from snap branches, coarse hairs caught on bark, and syringed soil from fresh depressions. Chain of custody was strict. She sent several samples to independent labs under blind identifiers to avoid bias. Most reports returned as inconclusive, but 2 came back with mitochondrial sequences showing primate ancestry that didn't match any species listed in North American wildlife databases. Then something odd happened. A lab technician emailed her excitedly about one hair sample's unique medulla structure. 24 hours later, he followed up with a brief message asking her to disregard his previous comments. A week later, his lab no longer accepted third-party sequencing requests. That wasn't coincidence. It was pressure. During production meetings, Mireya noticed editorial pacing changed whenever evidence leaned too strongly toward biological plausibility. Thermal shapes were trimmed, spectrogram analyses shortened. The audience saw mystery. The scientists saw patterns. Late nights, she cross-referenced data against primate territorial displacement theory. Everything pointed the same direction. Something had disrupted habitat further north. Something big, persistent, and unfamiliar. Quietly, she wrote a sentence in her journal. "This species isn't hiding from us. It's moving away from something else." And for the first time, television and science felt dangerously aligned, but not for the reason viewers thought. During a late-season shoot in the Appalachian foothills, Mireya noticed something unusual on a snapped branch, roughly 6 feet above the ground. At first glance, it looked like sap, but under her headlamp, it reflected dark red. The height alone ruled out deer, and the branch was freshly twisted, not broken by storm or animal browse. Using a sterile swab, she collected the sample and immediately sealed it. The cameras rolled, but production focused on the dramatic search visuals, not the quiet, clinical precision happening off to the side. When the blood work came back, it raised more questions than answers. Hemoglobin density was higher than any known North American mammal. Iron content suggested a diet rich in leafy vegetation, but there were traces of nitrogen levels typically linked to high protein consumption. Herbivore chemistry layered over omnivore metabolism. Even stranger, the erythrocytes lacked certain markers found in bears and primates. It was a biological outlier. Mireya requested a second panel from a private lab. This time, the sample returned flagged under non-standard morphology. A technician quietly called her after hours to warn that further analysis might trigger institutional review. He refused to elaborate. The next morning, his contact info had been scrubbed from the lab directory. Back on location, the forest felt tense. Birds stopped calling near the ridge where the sample was collected. Coyotes circled lower elevations, avoiding the area entirely. It wasn't fear of humans, it was avoidance of something else. When the episode aired months later, the blood sample never appeared, not even a mention. Viewers saw eerie nights, distant knocks, and thermal silhouettes. They didn't see the one piece of evidence that made Mireya's stomach drop. The network said it lacked broadcast clarity, but to Mireya, it felt like the first hint that some discoveries weren't meant for prime time. She wrote a note in her field journal that night. Blood is honest, edits aren't. After 2 seasons of fieldwork, Mireya began noticing a pattern that didn't fit the narrative the public assumed. Most viewers pictured Bigfoot as a static creature buried deep in remote forests, rarely moving, occasionally revealing itself. But when Mireya plotted every credible sighting, physical trace, and unexplained vocalization across a decade of Park Service reports, something emerged that chilled her more than any roar in the dark. The pattern was shifting south. These weren't random dots on a map. They formed a corridor, an ancient ecological highway once used by megafauna like giant ground sloths and early bison. It stretched from dense evergreen regions of Washington down through Oregon, across the Rockies, and into the Appalachian interior. The northern perimeter of the corridor became increasingly quiet. Sightings that once clustered in British Columbia tapered off. Camera traps in the Pacific Northwest went silent. Meanwhile, activity in Kentucky, Tennessee, and northern Georgia skyrocketed. At first, critics argued better reporting explained the change, but deer populations, mountain lion dispersal zones, and black bear feeding patterns, species with consistent behavior, remained stable. Only one curve moved dramatically. Encounters involving a tall, upright, primate-like figure. Mireya cross-referenced the pattern with climate data. Winters in the north were becoming erratic, freezing late, thawing early, destabilizing food chains. Habitat collapse pushes species along their most efficient pathways. But this corridor wasn't new. It was ancient. Something had used it before. She dug deeper into historical accounts. Indigenous oral traditions described forest people retreating south when northern winds changed. Trapper diaries from the 1800s mentioned the walkers, moving away from bitter cold. Whatever this species was, migration wasn't panic. It was instinct. The most troubling clue came from recent eyewitness testimony describing limping gaits and open wounds. Mireya flagged multiple cases in which the creature appeared injured, with matted fur at the shoulder or swelling near the knee. Migration isn't just movement, it's displacement. Predators don't cause slow migration, they cause retreat. She presented this quietly to a small circle of wildlife ecologists, half shrugged, cautious of reputation. The other half went silent. One biologist asked a single question. If they're leaving the north, what replaced them up there? That question infected her thinking. A shy species doesn't uproot without pressure. Something bigger, or louder, or hungrier had entered their territory. In her field journal, she wrote, "We're not watching a myth spread. We're watching a boundary collapse. And boundaries, once broken, rarely reform." In late 2022, months after cameras stopped rolling, a nondescript padded envelope arrived at Mireya's university office. No return address, no explanation. Inside was a sterile forensic swab, sealed in polymer and labeled only with GPS coordinates from deep within the Pacific Northwest. A single note was folded beneath it, sequenced from branch saliva. "Run quietly." Curiosity outweighed caution. Mireya logged the swab under a generic field code and sent it to a private sequencing lab she trusted, one known for studying remote primate populations. She asked for full genomic analysis. 2 weeks later, the lab's automated portal flagged the file as ready. When she opened the report, her heart sank. The genome showed a 97% similarity to Homo sapiens, similar to how gorillas overlap genetically with us. But several gene clusters were unlike anything in published databases. One cluster suggested reinforced skeletal density, specifically in the upper limbs. Another indicated elongated hyoid structure, allowing deeper, more resonant vocalization. A third flagged increased collagen density, implying unusual durability in connective tissue. Then came the most shocking annotation. Chromosome 2 fusion markers appeared similar to human, but with structural differences implying an older divergence event, not a recent mutation. If true, this would place the species on a branch of our family tree long assumed extinct or undiscovered. When Mireya requested deeper sequencing, the portal refused, her login credentials locked. Hours later, she received an email citing potential biohazard breach and informing her that all further inquiry must be routed through a federal bioethics review panel. That panel, on paper, didn't exist. A day later, the lab technician who initially processed the swab called her from a personal number. Whispering, he warned her never to mention the sample publicly. "It's real," he said, "and it's older than us." Before she could ask questions, he hung up. That evening, Mireya drove home feeling watched, not followed, observed. When she returned to campus the next morning, her office door was ajar. Nothing was missing. Everything on her desk, however, had been subtly rearranged, as if someone searched for a hidden device and wanted her to know. She backed up the data onto a private drive and encrypted it. Days later, her university's legal department issued a memo advising all faculty to avoid unverified zoonotic research. The timing was too perfect to be coincidence. That night, she wrote only 2 words in her field journal: "Genetics confirms." And beneath that, a quiet realization: if this species is real, then its silence has a reason. As Mireya pursued quiet conversations with park biologists and backcountry conservation officers, she began hearing whispers about something she initially assumed were campfire rumors: ranger disappearances. Official reports labeled them as hypothermia, falls, or failure to return from patrol. But patterns emerged the more she listened. One ranger in Washington vanished after responding to a late-night call about heavy pacing near a campground. His radio captured only 4 words before cutting into static: "It's walking upright." His body was found 2 weeks later at the base of a ravine with no fractures consistent with a fall. The official report omitted that detail. Another ranger in Northern California reported strange, rhythmic knocks echoing across a valley, 3 at a time, precisely spaced. He joked with co-workers that it sounded like communication. Days later, he failed to check in during a routine trail sweep. Search parties found his gear neatly stacked against a tree, as if someone had placed it there deliberately. His boots were 200 yards away, pointing uphill like he'd been running or chased. But the case that disturbed Mireya most happened in 2014. A senior ranger, respected, experienced, calm under pressure, filed an internal memo requesting additional patrol resources near an area of infrasound anomalies. He noted wildlife fleeing downhill and sudden silence zones where insects ceased. Weeks later, he disappeared during patrol. His body was never recovered. The memo was quietly archived archived under Wilderness Acoustic Confidential. The classification wasn't standard. When Mireya requested anonymized case summaries from a contact within the National Park Service, the file arrived with 90% of the text redacted. Only one phrase remained readable: vocal signatures inconsistent with known fauna. At a private symposium, an older ranger approached her quietly, hands trembling. He confessed that during his career, he'd encountered large, upright figures watching from ridge lines, never approaching, always observing. He said something she'd never forget. "We don't manage the wildlife out there. We manage the panic." 2 weeks later, that same ranger retired early and declined all interviews. As sightings shifted south, these disappearances followed the same corridor Mireya mapped. Injured wildlife, disrupted migration, missing patrol personnel. All of it pointed toward pressure building in the remote north. In her field journal, she wrote, "Rangers act as early warning systems. When they vanish, something has crossed the line." The question hanging over her research wasn't just what existed in the forests, it was what changed, forcing the quiet species to move, and why authorities worked so hard to keep the public from seeing the pattern. During an off-camera research trip to Kentucky's Red River Gorge, Mireya set up a lone campsite near an old logging trail. Just after 2 a.m., her equipment triggered from a sudden vibration in the soil. Not footsteps, but a low, pulsing resonance. Moments later, a screech tore across the ravine, dipping into subsonic frequencies her recorder barely captured. Spectrogram analysis later revealed 2 vocal folds vibrating independently, something only select primates can do. For nearly 40 minutes, something paced a perfect circle around her tent without breaking brush or snapping twigs. Intelligent movement, intentional distance. At dawn, she found twisted branches marking the perimeter, like quiet territorial boundaries. Months later, Mireya quietly assembled a panel of acousticians, field biologists, and geneticists. Their conclusion was sobering. Climate stress and territorial pressure will force this species toward populated forest edges within the decade. She believes contact is inevitable, not because the creature wants it, but because something else now occupies their northern habitat. In a recent closed-door symposium, she stated, "When shy species move, dominant ones arrive. It's not myth, it's succession." She's no longer asking for belief. She's preparing for the announcement no one is ready to make.